Canada intelligence, Chinese regime influences Canada's 2021 election. Taiwan should be at top of arms delivery list, U.S. lawmaker. Senior managers at Mintz Group depart Hong Kong after raids on their Beijing office. Woman arrested for supporting comedian who joked about Chinese army. The Chinese regime influenced Canada's 2021 federal election campaign with the re-election of Justin Trudeau's Liberals and the defeat of conservative politicians critical of Beijing. The Globe and Mail, citing classified Canadian Security Intelligence Service (CSIS) documents, reported the deep level of the Chinese Communist Party (CCP's) involvement in the Canadian elections. The documents, shared among senior government officials and intelligence allies of the U.S., Britain, Australia, and New Zealand, reveal CCP's orchestrated efforts to influence the election outcome. It reveals CCP leadership in Beijing pressured its consulates to leverage politically active Chinese community members and associations in Canada while concealing links to the communist regime. The key strategy deployed by the CCP in the election interference is to influence mainland Chinese Canadian voters. The CCP used disinformation campaigns and proxies associated with Chinese Canadian organizations in Vancouver and the Greater Toronto Area to oppose the Conservatives and promote the Trudeau Liberals. Chinese diplomats and proxies, including some of Chinese language media, were instructed to emphasize the Conservatives' critical stance on China. False narratives were circulated, suggesting that a conservative government would follow former U.S. President Donald Trump and ban Chinese students from certain universities, thus limiting their educational opportunities. The CSIS reports, quote, Chinese consulate officials conveying these messages, highlighting that the CCP only supported the Liberal Party of Canada. CSIS also described how Chinese diplomats engage in foreign interference operations to support political candidates and elected officials. Tactics employed by Chinese diplomats included undeclared cash donations, hiring international Chinese students for electoral campaigns, encouraging sympathetic donors to contribute to pro-China candidates. The interference operation specifically targeted vulnerable Chinese immigrants in Canada. The intelligence reports cite an unnamed Chinese consulate official saying that it is easy to influence Chinese immigrants to align with the CCP's position on various issues such as Taiwan, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Tibet, and the South China Sea. Chinese diplomats, including former Consul General Tong Xiaoling in Vancouver, made discreet efforts to urge Chinese Canadian organizations to rally votes for the Liberals and defeat conservative candidates. Tong Xiaoling and former Consul Wang Jin coordinated these efforts. Wang has direct ties to the CCP's United Front Work Department, which conducts covert and manipulative operations to influence overseas Chinese communities and foreign governments. Despite Beijing's preference for Trudeau, CCP wants to keep him in check. The documents reveal that China wanted parties in parliament to fight each other, allowing the party in power to implement policies that align with Beijing's interests. Former Conservative leader Erin O'Toole said CCP's disinformation efforts cost his party seats in the 2021 election. The Liberals secured victory with 160 seats, while the Conservatives had 119 seats. Despite the CCP's deep involvement in the election, the security and intelligence threats to the elections task force set up by the Trudeau government to oversee electoral threats did not release any public alerts regarding foreign interference throughout the 2019 or 2021 election campaigns. Mike Gallagher, the head of the U.S. House Select Committee on China, wants Taiwan to be at the top of the list of nations needing prompt weaponry shipments from Washington. According to the Taiwan News, Gallagher gave his remark during his trip to the UK, where the Wisconsin Republican was leading a bipartisan group including more than 10 members to talk about China-related problems. As reported by Central News Agency, he traveled to Taiwan 3 months ago. He met with President Tsai Ing-wen. President Tsai once mentioned that China launched cognitive warfare against Taiwan. The concept impressed him profoundly and showed that China's aggression against Taiwan is not limited to military and other hard power levels, but also includes cyber information. From this perspective, he said, China's invasion of Taiwan has already begun. Gallagher stated in London that the U.S. must make every effort to provide Taiwan with the military systems the island has already ordered and the weaponry it needs for its security. If the current schedule were not adjusted, he gave an example that Harpoon anti-ship missiles wouldn't reach Taiwan until 2027, which is unacceptable. He recently told the media in Washington that the U.S. must submit arms sales to Taiwan that have been delayed since 2015, including Javelin, Stinger, and Harpoon missiles. The American politician made the remarks during a press conference following a one-hour meeting with British lawmakers on May 19th. The following day, his delegation had lunch with Ben Wallace, the British Secretary of State for Defense. Gallagher argued that the deal with the issues faced by China, the U.S., the UK, and its allies must cooperate. He also emphasized the danger posed by Chinese infiltration, especially the use of Confucius Institutes for propaganda and intimidation of Chinese students abroad. Following the raids 2 months ago, American due diligence firm Mintz Group has moved some of their staff out of Hong Kong for their safety. Reuters reported from sources that the company has relocated about a half a dozen workers, with investigators and the head of the Hong Kong office among them. The people said it was only temporary, given the risks of the recent crackdown. Some are now staying in Singapore and have no intention of returning until the probe into the firm is over. 5 Beijing staff were arrested when Chinese authorities raided their office in the capital in March. All were Chinese nationals. Sources also disclosed that Mintz had recently performed corporate inquiries on forced labor in supply chains linked to China's Xinjiang area. The publication can't confirm if the probe was linked to the issue. However, it learned that the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, has openly told at least 2 senior executives at other foreign consultancy firms in China to steer clear of such work. One unspecified executive said, "They would tell us exactly what areas are off limits. Xinjiang was one of them." Allegations of forced labor, which the CCP vehemently denied despite countless testimonies from other Chinese police and surviving victims, have prompted Western governments to issue sanctions against Beijing. The warnings come as the U.S. pressures companies to clear out concerning links in their supply chain, making them more resilient on due diligence firms to ensure compliance with U.S. laws. Kurt Tong, a managing partner of the Asia Group, told the Wall Street Journal, "What due diligence firms do in China puts them in conflict with how China thinks about information and what information should be shared with foreigners." He added, "The definition of a state secret has always been loose in China." China has arrested a 34-year-old woman for defending the stand-up comedian who recently ran afoul with the authorities for poking fun at a military slogan. The premier Li Haoxi, or House, was detained for citing a military punchline by Chinese President Xi Jinping when referring to a scene of 2 dogs running after a squirrel. His company was also slammed with a fine of roughly $2 million, 14.7 million yuan. A woman surnamed Xi was unaccepting of the heavy penalties. Government mouthpiece Global Times reported that on May 16th, she wrote on the internet, "Why should House be banned? Aren't all soldier brothers just dog brothers?" The Dalian police in China's Liaoning province arrested the woman on that day. She was put into administrative detention after admitting that her remarks about the Chinese army were unwarranted and were a means of releasing personal grievances. The Guardian said the social media post appeared to have been deleted. By May 19th, it accumulated 4 million views. Much like the issue with House, opinions are split on how the woman reacted. Some criticized her for not being grateful to the military. Others were stunned by the heavy penalties for such jokes. According to the BBC, the fine against the company that booked House was so severe that there is speculation stand-up comedy would be virtually extinct from China in the following years. One overseas Chinese comic told The Guardian, "I didn't think that the red line would be so easily crossed and that there would be no mercy when it was." The person who wanted to conceal their identity continued, "Even internet users who have no public influence are being pursued. The whole atmosphere has become not just official censorship, but also self-censorship and mutual censorship. For a long time, in this way, one thinks and creates with fear. I feel that all areas of creativity and expression have no room for survival."